Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Whole Wellness Mama Summit, where we're unlocking the healthiest, less stressed mom in you using strategies from various wellness experts. I'm Amy Nesbitt, and I am excited to sit down and talk about perhaps fun or the dreaded but crucial topic of sex ed and puberty with Cath Hakanson. Cath has been talking to clients about sex for the past 25 years as a nurse, midwife, sex therapist, researcher, blogger, and educator. And she spent the past 10 years trying to unravel why parents, herself included, struggle with sex education. Her solution was to create Sex Ed Rescue, an online resource that simplifies the sex education and helps parents empower their children with the right information about sex so kids can talk to their parents about anything, no matter what. I previously heard her speak on this topic and loved the passion and humor that she brought into helping parents talk about this important topic with their kids. I think it is so, so important, yet we're afraid or, it just feels different. And so she has such a straightforward yet caring way to talk about it. I know you'll love hearing from her. Welcome all the way from Australia, Cath.
Hi, Amy, and thanks. Yeah, it's a lovely introduction. Thank you.
I know I covered a bit already, but for those that don't know you, I'd love for you to share your quick story of how you came to where you are now.
Oh, yeah, my story, very much related to sex education as to how I got here. I've always worked in sexual health, and then I decided to do the kid thing with my partner and had worked in schools as a sex educator and then became a parent. And then noticed, you'd have 3-year-old masturbating on the lounge and there'd be people over. And it's like I just wasn't sure about how to handle stuff. Like, when do I tell them about sex? Do I teach them it's a vulva or a vagina, or, what do you do? So I struggled. So I thought, okay, well, I work as a sex therapist. I know about this stuff. So I started searching online, and I was getting really frustrated because I would find like a 5-page PDF, and that was the best thing I could find. And it would say, teach them the name of their private parts. And it's like, well, yeah, but how do I do that? Give me a bit more information. As I had all these fears and doubts, and I was finding information, but it was just too broad, too general, and I needed details, and I needed to know that I wasn't going to screw my kids up, because that was a real fear that I had. So I then started talking to other parents and realized that they were just as clueless as me. So I then decided after a few years that I would create Sex Ed Rescue as a way to help parents. And so I've created it as a resource that I wish I'd had when my kids were younger. So I've filled it with lots of advice and lots of information, and then just created the resources to make sex education easier and let parents know that they're not alone, that others are struggling with this as well, and that there is a way to make it simpler and easier. So that's sort of my journey. So my kids are now 17 and nearly 14. So yeah, so it's been really interesting to sort of create resources as my kids have got older as well, and to have these lived experiences
Yeah, my
with
kids are
it.
7 and 9, so we'll talk about puberty a little bit later, but we'll get into some of that. Um, I've learned over the last few years that kind of this, at least I had this ick factor, or this, oh, I have to talk about this with my kids, and kind of postponing it. But that really kind of comes from our own experience. And so when we start talking about it more matter of factly, with younger kids, along with our values, that ick stuff kind of isn't there. Um, I'm definitely a proponent of this now and share this with the parents at all. For those that dread talking about this topic, can you share some tips as to how to start?
Yeah. And look, because I've got that nursing background, I'm big into addressing your fears, first of all. So before you even start talking about a conversation. So classic example was when I was writing up my porn talk course for kids. I was sitting here writing and telling parents what they should know about porn. And then I'd have a 10-year-old on the computer next to me, and I'd sit here and I'd go, oh, I really should be talking to him more about porn, haven't chatted for a little while. And then I'd sit there and I'd think, oh, but he's 10. This is the age where they're curious. Maybe by talking, I'll actually spark some curiosity and he'll go Google it. And before I know it, he'll be watching all this porn and I'll be clueless. So, and that caught me out. And this is what I just love about what I do, is because I'm parenting my own kids, and sometimes it pushes your own buttons. So I think sometimes you just have to be aware of, first of all, like you might want to start talking to your kid about something, but if you notice that there's some resistance coming in, to stop and sit with that resistance and go, well, okay, what will happen if I do talk? What will happen if I don't talk? So addressing fears, first of all. And I guess the biggest thing is just being aware that information empowers kids, it doesn't harm them. So we can't, and I often remind parents to sit back and look at your own childhood and think about your own adolescence and think about some of your own sexual decisions that you may have made yourself. And do you want your children to make the same decisions? So knowing what you don't want is often a good guide, because I've found that probably 99.99% of parents have had crappy, bad, or no sex education at all.
Or just
And
in
that can be really,
school, right? Where
yeah,
this is
or
the first
just
time
in,
that you've heard it. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that can be really hard as well, because you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. It's like, how can you drive a car if you've never been taught how to drive and you've never seen anyone drive? The same thing with sex education. As parents, we're coming into it blind. We know what we don't want to do, and then somehow we've got to flip that upside down and turn it into something that we do want to do.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, it's just believing that it doesn't actually harm children. And I've worked in sexual health for a long time, and that's part of the reason why I also started Sex Ed Rescue, was because I'd seen the negative effects of no sex education. And occasionally I'd see the positive effect of it. And the kids, the teenagers and young adults that were coming in that had been, had unsafe sex or had done something or had a problem, the ones that had had sex education, they bounced back and recovered and learnt from it. But the ones that were making the bad decisions, they kept coming in all the time. And just the trauma around their own sex education was sad.
Yeah. So I've learned over the last few years that it's never too young to start. And some moms might have just heard that and went, "What? Are you crazy?" But can you explain? Maybe we start with, what do you mean by sex education, and why is this that it's so important to start young, and the benefits of making these talks more normalized throughout the home?
Yeah, sex education, we really should be calling it something different, and they're trying to put a new spin on it, but I tend to use the language that parents use. So because we call it sex ed, sex education, many parents believe that it's just about sex. And that's what I also thought myself, because that's what, you watch a movie and they joke about the talk,
Yeah.
and it's that talk that happens at puberty that's happening because they're now going to be fertile, and there's a possibility they might have sex and get pregnant. So most of us see the talk as being this thing that happens at age around sex. But when we look at sexuality and sex education, the whole purpose, why do we want to have these conversations? It's so that kids can make smart decisions about their bodies, and hopefully not make some of the mistakes that we made through our ignorance as well. So, and when we look at making smart decisions, it's not knowledge about how to get an STI or how to not get pregnant and, how to not sext or how to sex safely. It's actually knowledge about how to have a healthy, respectful relationship. And that could be a relationship with a friend, it could be with a work colleague, or it could be a romantic partner. So when we want to look at sex education as in what we're working towards, the goal, it changes what we talk about. And sex is really just the tip of the iceberg. It's like one of the many, many, many conversations that you have. And so when parents, like I got a Facebook group and it's got, I think, nearly 140,000 parents. And when they join, I always go, do you want to get my parent newsletter? Because that's the best way for you to get more comfortable and to learn about what this is all about. And so many of them say, no, my child's not old enough yet. They're only 8. They're not old enough. And I have some, but then I have parents with babies and toddlers, and they're loving the information. They're wanting to talk. So technically, if you look at the textbook, sex education starts from the time a child's born, when they, it comes out of the vagina or out of the cut in the tummy, and the doctor or the midwife holds it up and says it's a boy or a girl based on what the genitals are. But I think sex education really starts at about the age of 3, which is where kids first start being curious about where babies come from. They start noticing that bodies are different. So some bodies might have a vulva and some have a penis, and they're curious about that because they're trying to work out the world. So yeah, I think it tends to start around that 3-4 age group. That's the age where parents consciously recognize or start talking about stuff.
This might be a big question, but is there a rough, like, we should talk about these things by this age kind of time frame or framework that you can share?
Yeah, there sort of is, because the way my brain works is I have to unpick a topic. So I have to know that the research behind it's actually credible, because some of the research in sexology is really interesting. So some of the early stuff that we know about how our bodies work was based on a population of small women in a clinic that were sex workers, and they would masturbate with these really big old-fashioned dildos. And that was all our knowledge. That was what all our understanding about sexuality was based on. And when you understand that, it makes you think, well, hang on, that's not actually all that reliable. So I like to unpack stuff and go, well, okay, if I'm going to be teaching parents to do this stuff, I actually need to know that the experts, where they got their information from, to make sure that, I'm okay with recommending that. So now I've lost the thought of the question. Sorry, my brain goes off on a tangent at times.
The by age.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, sorry. 6 in the morning and I can hear the cat zooming in the background. Yes. So what happens is, as sex educators, we actually look at healthy sexual development. So we look at how a kid develops. So, they have to roll over before they can sit, and then they crawl, and then they sit, and then they walk and they run. So we need to make sure that they're developing properly, because if a kid goes from rolling over to running, they've missed some vital development in the middle. So that's how sexology works in regards to looking at what we do with sex education. So we actually look at the things that kids are naturally curious about, the behaviours that we're doing, and sex education is wrapped around making sure we satisfy their curiosity, but that we also keep them safe, because we know that it's natural for kids to masturbate, but if they're going to do it on the school bus or on a park bench or in the classroom, it makes them vulnerable. You might have someone walk past and go, well, hang on, those parents haven't been talking to that kid. Maybe there's someone I can groom for my own sexual needs. So it leaves them vulnerable to sexual abuse, and it also leaves them vulnerable to teasing and just not fitting into society. So that's what sex education is basically about. It's about satisfying their curiosity, making sure they develop healthy, but also keeping them safe and socializing them into society so that they fit in and they know what's socially acceptable and what's not.
Yeah. I like that you brought up the safety part, because I think this is such a huge part of safety, right? It's not just that we need to talk to them, but this actually helps them be more confident. They know they're not getting misinformation from their friends who think that
Yeah.
they're able to set their boundaries. Can you expand a little more on that?
Oh, there's some great research that is ongoing research, because sex education, so many governments ban it and restrict it. So there's lots of really good research that looks at the impact of it, so that we can actually go, well, is this actually helping kids? The conversations we're having, are they actually having an impact? And yes, they are. There's a sex education group in the UK, in England, and about every 7 years they pull the data together and they have a look at it. And the findings, every 7 years are always the same thing. And what they're telling us are that it makes kids safer, because if they're going to be touched inappropriately, at least they can then tell us and we can stop it. Or they're displaying behaviours that gives people messages to say that they're not going to be an easy victim. So move on to your next victim or next person to look at. So it keeps kids safer. And it also tells us that as they become teenagers, that if they are going to be sexually active, They're going to be older than most of their other friends. They're going to be safer. So there's less risk of pregnancy and them catching STIs, which can really traumatize teenagers because they think it's the end of the world. And it also means that when they are sexually active, that they're actually enjoying it. They're actually having pleasurable sex. And it's also consensual sex as well. So there's less of a risk of them being sexually assaulted as well. So there's lots of really good research that does support it.
Mhm. I love that. Yeah. It's important. I totally agree on this. Is there anything people should keep in mind about the difference of how we approach this with boys versus girls, or does it not matter?
Basically, there's no sort of there's nothing really that you need to do any differently. A lot of parents get caught up on about the fact of like, okay, my kid's got a penis, I don't. So how can I talk to them about wet dreams, ejaculations, erections? A lot of parents freak out. One of my books used to be a boy book and a girl book, and it still is. I sell 3 times as many boy books as I do girl books because it's the mums who are worried because they haven't been through a male puberty themselves, so they don't know what to do. So the conversations aren't any different. And if anything, like I've got a daughter and a son, so my son knows about periods and the changes that happen to a female body, and my daughter about changes that happen to boys as well. So it's important for him to have an understanding of what happens to everyone as well. So no, nothing really different depending on the gender of them.
It's a great point. They should know about everything.
Yeah, pretty much.
Um, so I want to talk about puberty as well. And I'm not sure, maybe I was in denial, but it just dawned on me fairly recently that I am approaching this with my older son, who I mentioned earlier is 9, because it starts way before the physical changes kick in, right? Can you share some things for moms like myself who have kids nearing this age of what we should know going into puberty?
Yeah, puberty is an interesting one. It's one of those things that creep up on you, and it's either you notice the changes in your own child, or you're at school and you notice a bunch of kids walk by and you go, hang on, they're friends of my kid and I can smell them and they're sweaty and they're getting bigger. And yeah, so puberty is one of those things that it creeps up on you, and it happens at different stages. So I remember when my son was 12, one of his friends actually was starting to grow a beard at 12 and had a really deep voice. And then most of the others were little kids. So it's normalizing and making sure that they know it's coming on, because research tells us that, and also common sense as well, is that when kids know something's going to happen, they're more okay about it. So if you're going to be moving house, you don't just tell them on the day that the truck moves up. You get them prepared, you get them ready for it. And puberty is very similar. It's like, if we can let kids know that one day their body's going to start changing, and that's okay, it happens to everyone's body, they're more prepared and more okay about it. And there's lots of really good little books. Like you can read books to a 5-year-old about puberty. Babette Cole from the UK has written the most beautiful book, Hair in Funny Places, and it turns puberty into an adventure. And kids read this and it's like, wow, this is going to happen to me one day. I can't wait, because it's so engaging and funny and entertaining. And she turns it into a great adventure. But there's lots of resources that can help you with having these conversations early. But yeah, puberty is one of those things that does creep up on you. And parents often, it's starting to happen when parents are starting to talk about the friendship issues and kids not fitting in and kids starting to be a little bit mean to each other as well. And the moodiness, you often hear parents say that like their child, it's like it's a different child. They're behaving differently. So their body's not changing, but up here, there's changes happening. And that's that very early signs that the biological clock is starting to tick and starting to make changes in anticipation of changing the body.
I loved your analogy of switching houses, because you're right. We wouldn't just spring that on them. And this is great. I know we've had conversations where one of my kids has said, oh, when am I going to have, it wasn't hair in anywhere unique, but on his arm. He said, when am I going to have arm hair like dad? And so we had conversations like that. But I feel like that's the beauty of it also, of we've read books with them, we've had these conversations just kind of ongoing with them, and so they feel free to ask these kind of out of nowhere questions that they're
Yeah.
thinking about, right? And so I
Yeah.
love that that is what you are teach. I don't know if teaching is the right word, but trying to
Mm.
get parents to do, to have these conversations on a regular basis, not just one big V talk, like we said earlier.
Yeah. And that thing that you're saying, that your kids are happy to ask questions, that is so important because, look, we're parents and I'm a parent. My life is busy. And when I first started thinking about sex education, it was sort of like, oh, it's another thing I have to do as a parent. You have this
Yeah.
huge checklist because we all want to be better parents than we were parented ourselves. We all want to do the right thing. We don't want to screw up our kids and we don't want to screw up our relationships with them either. And this is where parenting can get really tricky. And this is what I love about sex education, because when I first started, I thought it was just another thing that you did. But then I slowly realized it's actually also your parenting style as well. And it's about the connection and the relationship that you have with your kids. And the thing that I've noticed as my kids have got older is our relationship is still as close as they are as teens as it was when they were younger. And that's because I've done all that hard work of having those open, honest, and positive conversations where they come up and go, oh, when am I going to get hair on my arm? You go, great question. And then you answer it. But it's creating that culture. And when you can create that sort of environment, sex education just becomes a part of your life. Like occasionally you might hear something on the radio or one of the school mums might mention something and you might go, oh, I haven't talked about that yet. So you might go find a book and read it or something with them. But occasionally you get triggers and reminders that you need to talk about stuff. But that's that open, ongoing conversation so that kids, they'll come to you with the things that they're curious about and then you just talk about it. And it's easy. You don't have to sort of set time aside for it. You just fit it into your everyday life.
Yeah, I know you had mentioned porn earlier, and that's one of the things we've talked about of, okay, you guys use these devices, they're on computers without us, so I'm not going to be there for every second. If you
Mm.
see something like a naked body or, whatever other inappropriate things, I can't remember all the things that I mentioned, but you need to let us know, right? It's okay. It's not like this, you're in trouble thing. But it's important for them to know that these are things that they might come across.
Oh, definitely. After having worked with parents for so long that their kids are finding porn, it's the kids that don't have a parent to turn to, they're the ones that have the problems as well. Yeah. And so as parents, yeah, we need to be talking about this stuff. And it can be scary. Porn's a scary topic. It triggers a lot of people. They have so many negative associations with it. And when we can think of the kid watching it and how do we have a conversation about it, it's really challenging.
Yeah. I think I even had a friend that said her kid was looking up Harry Potter something, and
Ah,
something popped up, and thankfully she was there to have that
mm,
conversation with them. But you could be looking for the weirdest thing or like normalest things, and then, so
yeah,
a good thing to keep in mind. So what if
definitely.
people are thinking, shoot, I'm already behind, I already have a kid going through puberty, or wherever they may be, what can they do?
I strongly believe that you're never too late. I had an email from a parent the other day and her kids had left home. And she, for some reason, decided she was going to start talking to them about this stuff. So she was reading my stuff and she'd started conversations with her kids that had left home. And her kids at first were a little bit like, oh, so Mum, why are we having these conversations? So she explained why. She apologized for having screwed up when they were younger and for not having talked at all. But she said, look, you're still my kids. You still need me. So I want things to be different. And her kids were loving it. They were coming home and telling her about what they got up to on the weekend, but they were able to talk with her about it and she could share her experiences and perspectives and guide them as well. And it was just wonderful. So it's never too late to start these conversations. Sometimes, though, you leave it so late that it feels awkward. It's like when you see someone down the street and they go, and they go up to you and they go, "Oh, hi, Amy, how are you?" And you're sitting there thinking, "Okay, I know them. What's their name? They can remember my name. I can't remember theirs." And you leave it for so long that it becomes like if you turned around to them and said, "So, what's your name again? Sorry." You've left it so long that it's really awkward. So The same thing can happen with sex education. Parents feel really awkward because it's like, well, we've never talked about this stuff before. They're 12 or 13. They're going to think I'm crazy if I start talking about this stuff. So I'm big into, if you feel like you've left it too late, is you can apologize to your kids and you can go, hey, I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were talking about sex education, and it made me think that, we haven't had any conversations about how babies are made or sex or anything like that. And I've now realized that maybe we should have been having these conversations. So, I'm going to do some more reading and stuff, and we're going to start talking about this stuff. Just wanted to let you know. Or you can just grab a book and slip it into the bedtime story pile and go, oh, look at this book that I got today. It's about how babies are made. And you can start talking about it and just slowly introduce it into your life. Or you could turn around to your kid and say, you heard your friends at school talking about sex. Do you know what sex is? And then take it from what they already know and get started. But there's lots of different little ways that you can start these conversations, and they don't have to feel awkward and unnatural. There's little tricks that you can do, like asking them a question. Do they know what sex is? Can then turn it into a natural conversation that feels like it's just, popped up in life.
I love that. Well, I'd love to leave our moms with a quick action or challenge that they can perform today to start taking action, making changes, and then they can ask questions or leave us comments of how it went. Can you share your challenge for our mamas for today?
Yes, my challenge is to grab a sex education book. So this could be a matter of turning up at your local library and saying, hey, have you got any birds and bees or sex ed books for a whatever age child, and seeing what they've got. A lot of libraries worldwide do have them because librarians recognize that it's a conversation that needs to happen, or jumping online and ordering a book. And I've got, like, on the website, there's lots and lots of different books. But if you just, look for birds these books, you'll find something. So that's my challenge for you. And this could be a book about consent, could be a book about gender, could be a book about how babies are made. It could even be a book about internet safety or something, but it's about starting conversations. And books are just a really simple, safe and easy way to get started with these conversations.
I know we've had books on even just like the body, right? And it's like kind of the baby steps going into it, depending on the age of the child.
Yeah.
Love that suggestion.
Yeah.
No, and we love our local library. Tons of different resources.
Yeah, books are wonderful because if you want to talk to them about sex and you're sitting there freaking out going, I won't remember what to say. What do I say? Doesn't matter with a book because it's all there for you. You just repeat. If you go, oh, well, let's look and see what the book says. So books just take away a lot of anxiety.
Yeah. And I remember I would read the book with the kids and they had tons of questions as we were going through, right? So it just became this conversation. And if people feel awkward about just approaching their child and asking the question, right, I think a book is a fantastic suggestion of where to start.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of books. I don't think you can ever have too many.
Me too. And I know you have a fantastic free gift for everyone. Can you share what it is and how people can connect with you further?
Yeah, I've done what I call a super short 30-minute webinar, which quickly goes over what sex education is. Because one of the things that I noticed when I first started was parents were needing to do this thing, but they didn't know what it was. So that goes into the different things to talk about, why you want to talk, some of the things that might stop you and things like that, and just gives you that basic knowledge so that you then don't have to sit there thinking, what the heck am I supposed to be doing? How does this whole thing work? Because at least you then have that grounding and that basic knowledge of what it's all about before you then start having conversations.
Perfect. And where can people find you?
Okay, so my home is Sex Ed Rescue, which is all about rescuing parents with sex education. So that's, just Sex Ed Rescue. Yeah. Took Google a little while to work out that I was actually educational and I wasn't like a porn site. Oh, it took 2 years. I even rang them one day and the guy laughed. He said, well, if you put sex in your business name, what do you expect? And I said, yeah, I know. But Google's eventually now trained. Whenever I used to put my website name in, all the porn sites and all the local adult shops would pop up as well, but
Oh no.
doesn't happen now, thankfully.
Perfect, perfect.
Yeah.
Anything else you would like to share with our parents before we wrap up?
No, other than just be kind to yourself. As parents, I think we're our own worst critic because we judge ourselves and we all want to do a really good job. So I think with sex education, it's about one step at a time, and just be aware that your buttons might get pushed and stuff, and at times you'll question why you're even doing this, but it's the outcomes that you get at the end. And as I said to you when I first started, I thought it was about teaching my kids about sex. And I realized it's actually not. It's just a way to keep a stronger, more connected relationship where you're being open and honest and talking about sexuality and some of the other tough things that kids need to know about and need to hear about from us.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Cath, again for sharing such powerful, important information with us. And everyone, be sure to come back for more amazing summit speakers.
Thanks, Amy. It was great to chat, and hopefully everyone finds it helpful.
Absolutely.